If you find it interesting, please give me a subscribe, a like, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next true horror stories. Thanks for watching. My story begins in the fall of 1947, when I, a young man named Lucas, had just returned from the war. I had fought in the European theater during World War II, and the haunting memories of what I had experienced never left me. Images of fallen comrades, the sound of gunfire, and bloody scenes still haunted my sleep. One afternoon, after I returned to my small house in the northern suburbs of the United States, I began to feel something strange. Everything in the house was the same as before, but the air around me felt cold and different. When I entered the bedroom, I heard a soft hissing sound, as if someone was calling my name from behind. Those hissing sounds made me shiver, but I told myself that I was imagining things. However, when I turned around, I saw the shadow of a man standing in the corner of the room, just a faint silhouette. My whole body was frozen, but I couldn't move. That was the first moment I encountered the ghost of a soldier who had died in the war. That image was not just an illusion, but the truth. After that night, I could not sleep well anymore. Every night, I heard strange sounds and felt like someone was standing outside the window, waiting. Those souls were not just vague ghosts, but soldiers who had died in the war, those who sacrificed themselves in battles that were never mentioned in history books. One night, I decided to face this fear. I took a weak oil lamp with me and went out to search for the truth. When I went into the forest near my house, where I felt the presence of the souls, I saw a ghostly army, figures in old uniforms, moving silently as if they were still fighting, continuing their journey from the past. Each of their footsteps shook the earth, and I felt their pain and anger. During one of my investigations into these strange phenomena, I met an old woman in a nearby village. She told me about the ghosts of war, about souls who could not rest because they had not fulfilled their duty. She said that these ghosts could only be released when they found justice, or when someone brave enough to help them unravel the unfinished mystery. I knew that I needed to confront these ghosts and find out the truth behind their haunting. But when I returned to the deep forest to search for more clues, I saw a ghost waiting for me. It was a soldier, his face covered by a layer of smoke. Only his eyes were shining brightly. He did not say anything, but those eyes seemed to want me to do something to free him. Finally, I found a place in the woods that used to be an old military camp, now filled with ruins and painful memories. There, I discovered an old diary recording stories of wars, fierce battles, and souls who could not rest because of unfulfilled vows. When I opened the diary, a cold wind suddenly blew, and I felt the presence of the spirits gathering around. I read the last words in the diary aloud, asking for their forgiveness and hoping that they would find peace. Suddenly, a huge storm came, and the light from the fires in the woods flared up as if to guide the ghosts. I knew I could no longer run away from these spirits. The feeling of being watched all night long was enough. I needed to face them and find a way to free myself as well as them. That night, when I returned to the forest, I decided to bring an old camera that my grandfather had used during the war. I didn't know what it was, but I had a feeling that if I could capture the images of the spirits, I might find a way to free them. As I entered the forest, a hazy mist covered everything. The sky was dark, but a strange light seemed to emanate from the ground itself, from the cracks in the ground, like a surge of spiritual energy. My footsteps echoed in the quiet space, each step feeling heavier. And then I saw them, the warrior spirits. This time they were no longer the blurry figures I had seen before. They stood right in front of me, each in a tattered uniform with wounds still visible. Their eyes were empty and filled with anger. One soldier stepped forward, his face badly wounded, but his eyes still shining. He looked at me as if I were his last hope. "We cannot move on," the soldier said, his voice hoarse and pained, "because there is a secret that has not been revealed, a crime that we cannot forgive ourselves. But you can help us." I could sense the desperation in that voice, and though fear overwhelmed me, I decided to take another step to learn more about these souls. "What secret?" I asked. He was silent for a moment, his eyes becoming dreamy as if recalling a distant memory. "We did something wrong in the war. We abandoned our comrades when they needed us most, and so we are buried in those hauntings. But there is one, the only one who can forgive us. That person is our commander." At this point, I began to understand. These souls are not only trapped by their own sins, but they are also seeking forgiveness from the one who led them through the war. I need to find that commander, the one who can help them find peace. The next day, I went to a remote village where the soldiers in the forest had stopped before going to the battlefield. In this village, I found an old man named Arthur. He had been the commander of a unit during the war, and when I told him about the spirits in the forest, he seemed to have known. "Those spirits were my comrades," Arthur said, his voice low and full of pain. "They died in a battle that I could not save, and since then they have not been able to move on, have not been able to forgive themselves, have not been able to forgive me. Only when I face them and confess my sins can they find peace." I understood that, to help these spirits, I had to return to the forest with Arthur and face the painful past he had left behind. But I also knew that this would not be a simple confrontation. Those spirits did not forgive easily. They needed the truth, and this truth would be the final step in their journey to liberation. When Arthur and I returned to the forest, the atmosphere was so heavy that it felt as if we were walking into a storm. The spirits appeared immediately, the light from the lamps in our hands fading under the power of the past hauntings. Arthur stood before them, eyes closed, hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice no longer as strong as before, but filled with deep regret. "I couldn't save you. I abandoned you, but I won't run away again. Forgive me and yourselves." As Arthur's last words left my mouth, a cold wind blew, and the spirits suddenly lit up like stars. Their light was dazzling, then slowly faded into the air, as if they had found the peace they needed. After Arthur and I left the forest, a strange feeling enveloped me. The spirits were indeed released, but there was a deadly silence in the air that I could not explain. I felt that this confrontation was not over, and that the horrors had not yet completely disappeared. During the following days, I began to sense the presence of a force, completely different from the spirits I had encountered. It was not just an ordinary ghost, but something much more terrifying. A shadowy darkness, as if it were watching me from afar, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every night, I heard strange noises from the dark corners of the house. Footsteps crept up, not from outside the door, but from inside. One evening, I decided to investigate, and as if I was being pulled by an invisible force, I went down to the basement, where I had not been for a long time. The old wooden door of the basement creaked as if in protest. As I entered the basement, I couldn't help but feel a sudden chill. The air in the basement was thick, as if there was a thin but dense fog. I took each step carefully, holding the weak oil lamp in my hand, its light swaying as if it was afraid. Suddenly, I heard a very small, very light breathing sound, but it was so clear that I couldn't help but hear it. That breathing sound came from behind, from the darkness. I turned around, and from the darkness, a huge figure began to hover. It was no longer a spirit. It was a creature, an inexplicable monster. Its eyes glowed like two burning torches, and when I looked at them, I felt a deep fear, as if life and death were intertwined. The monster didn't say anything. It just let out a terrifying screech, then rushed towards me with unbelievable speed. I didn't have time to think, just hurriedly ran up the stairs, but it was too fast, and a long arm, black as the night, grabbed me, pulling me down. In that moment, I felt a terrible power from the monster, but something strange happened. A voice rang out in my head. It was Arthur's voice. Don't let it drag you down. It is not a spirit. It is the darkness that this spirit has created. You must face it with your own courage. Although the fear inside me seemed to want to swallow me, I knew that this was the time to fight, not run. I remembered what I had learned from the previous spirits, that only by facing fear can we overcome it. I tried to breathe deeply, and in a split second, I grabbed the oil lamp, used it as a weapon, and threw it at the monster's face. As the fire flared up, a powerful beam of light tore through the darkness, illuminating the surrounding area. The monster let out a painful scream, as if the light hurt it more than any wound. But I knew that the light was only part of the release. What was more important was to defeat the fear within myself. With each step, I felt my strength growing. I looked straight into the monster's glowing eyes and said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore. I won't let you take over my life." The cold wind in the basement seemed to be torn apart, and a blinding light burst out, engulfing the monster. It let out a final roar, then disappeared into the invisible space, as if sucked away by a storm of light. After that confrontation, everything seemed to return to peace. The basement was no longer dark, no longer the monsters hissing and breathing. I stood there, looking into the empty space, and felt a sense of relief like never before. From that day on, my house was no longer haunted. I no longer heard strange noises, no longer felt like someone was watching me. The souls I had helped, the hauntings of the past were released, and I finally felt like I had truly come back to life. Not a person haunted by the past of war, but a person who could move on to the future. From that moment on, I knew that darkness and fear would never win if I faced them courageously. And souls, no matter how painful, would always find a way to escape if they were brave enough to face themselves. This story is still ongoing, but I have overcome the most terrible challenges. The ghosts were released, and I found peace in my soul. But I will never forget the confrontations, the terrible fears I had to face to regain my own life.